Picture a ghost, right? Just this ghost, draped in an ancient, flowing robe, driving a bright yellow bulldozer straight into a giant hourglass.
I mean, that is quite the mental image.
It really is. And believe it or not, you aren't listening to the plot of some surreal fantasy novel right now.
No, not at all.
You are actually looking at a highly engineered cognitive shortcut. And it's designed to help you memorize advanced English grammar.
Which is wild, because it sounds utterly chaotic, you know? But there is a deeply logical framework behind all that bizarre imagery.
Yeah, exactly. Today we're exploring a really fascinating document. It's titled 3 Surefire Formulas for 16 Tenses Using the Imagination Method.
By Nandia Bilkis-Serbanov.
Right, and it completely deconstructs the way we absorb complex information.
It really does, because usually when you set out to learn a language's structural rules, the expectation is that it will be this tedious grind, right?
Oh, totally. You are handed a massive spreadsheet of pronouns and verb conjugations, and you just stare at it until your brain supposedly accepts the data.
Which for most of us, it never really does.
Exactly. But Nancy's approach just throws the spreadsheet out the window. And her backstory actually explains why. She was a top-performing student who happened to suffer from a notoriously terrible memory.
Right, rote memorization simply did not work for her.
It failed her completely. So to survive her academic environment, she had to construct these highly unconventional workarounds.
And necessity truly is the mother of invention here, because our mission in this deep dive is to unpack those exact methods.
Yes, we want to really understand how translating dry, structural information, specifically the 16 English tenses, into vivid landscapes, mathematical algorithms, and role-playing scenarios fundamentally alters how the brain works.
How it encodes and retrieves knowledge, yeah.
And she is incredibly unapologetic about our methods, too. She literally opens her guide with a blunt disclaimer. She says, if you don't like to fantasize, do not buy this book.
I love that. It acts as a great filter.
It really does.
Because it signals immediately that you must engage actively with the material. You cannot passively consume this guide. You have to actually construct the mental architecture she is describing.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because before we get to, ghosts driving bulldozers, we need to establish the foundational grid she is working with.
Right, the basic map.
Yeah. We all know the standard timeline, right? Past, present, future.
Yeah.
But she forces us to look at the outlier. This thing called future in the past.
Which is always tricky for learners.
Oh, absolutely. It's that weird perspective of what was going to happen from a historical vantage point.
And the grid itself is basically a 4x4 matrix. You have those 4 time periods intersecting with 4 distinct categories of action.
And the sheer volume of combining those variables is exactly why the 16 tenses feel so intimidating to adult learners.
Exactly. Trying to keep future perfect continuous isolated from, say, past perfect using only abstract terminology, it just overloads working memory.
Totally. So to fix that overload, Nandia strips away the linguistic jargon entirely. She assigns a distinct, tangible flavor to each of the 4 action categories.
Flavor is a good word for it. She gives you a physical metaphor instead of a textbook definition.
Right. So for the simple category, she tells you to picture the basic foundation of a house.
A literal brick foundation.
Yeah. It represents undisputed facts or habits. Basically the solid brick and mortar of an action.
And then for the continuous or progressive category, the mental object shifts to a film currently playing on a screen.
Which makes sense, because it's continuous.
Exactly. It captures the ongoing progress, the sense that the camera is actively rolling on a scene unfolding in real time.
I really like how that changes the mental texture of the grammar. Instead of a boring timeline, it's a movie.
Yes. And then, for the perfect category, which are actions that are finished but still impact the present, she uses the image of a single footprint in the sand of time.
Oh, wow.
Right. The step was taken, the person is gone, but the physical evidence remains.
That is so evocative.
Yeah.
And if you extend that logic to the final category, which is perfect continuous, you get a long, unbroken trail of footprints.
Showing an action that has been happening for quite some time.
It's funny because traditional textbooks just use these flat timelines with little X marks on them. But we are essentially building a cinematic universe here instead.
We really are.
We have the setting, the camera rolling, and the physical evidence left on the ground.
And what's fascinating here is the underlying cognitive science.
Right. Why does this actually work?
Well, by assigning a physical object, like a brick foundation or a footprint, to an abstract syntactical rule, Nandia is hijacking your spatial memory.
Hijacking it. I like that.
Yeah, because human beings did not evolve to memorize conjugation tables.
Yeah.
We evolved to map our physical environments, like remembering where a water source is or where a predator was last seen.
So you are tapping into a system your brain is already highly optimized for.
Precisely. When you try to remember an arbitrary grammar rule, you rely on semantic memory. And semantic memory is brittle. It's easily overwritten.
But when you visualize a footprint in the sand,
You're using spatial and visual centers, which are far more robust and easier to recall under pressure.
that makes so much sense.
Ah.
But knowing the grid is really just half the battle. You still have to memorize where everything goes without reverting to the textbook.
Right, how do you combine them in real time?
Exactly. How does she bypass that? Well, she turns the entire timeline into a literal map, which brings us to her first major method, the treasure map.
The treasure map. This is where we start building actual visual icons for the time periods themselves.
Yes, icons that we will later combine with our action metaphors. So she assigns a brightly shining sun to represent the present.
Makes sense. It's bright, it's right now.
Yeah. And for the past, she uses an antique clock that has completely stopped moving.
Which is such a brilliant detail. The stopped clock reinforces the permanence and unchangeable nature of the past.
It's locked in.
Yeah.
Then for the future, the icon is a rocket resting on a launch pad, just pointing upward.
Ready to go.
Exactly. And then for that weird future in the past tense, the symbol is the shadow of an hourglass.
Just the shadow.
Yeah, just the shadow. It's something that was projected to happen, but it's just a shadow now.
I love that imagery.
So if I'm trying to internalize, say, present continuous,
Mm-hmm.
I have to combine the sun with the rolling film. The image Nandia gives us is a literal, brightly shining sun holding a camera, recording a live movie.
It creates this compound visual cue.
Yeah.
And because you are visualizing it, the brain groups those two concepts, present time and ongoing action, into a single chunk of information.
Right. And if I take this logic to the next level, a terrifyingly complex tense like past perfect continuous actually becomes incredibly simple to visualize.
How so? Walk me through it.
Well, the past is the stopped antique clock, right? And perfect continuous is the long, continuing set of footprints. So I'm picturing an old, dusty clock face pointing down at a marathon runner who had already been running for miles, leaving a huge trail of footprints right before the clock froze.
Wow. And the vividness of that image is exactly what prevents the feeling of being overwhelmed in a real-time conversation.
Because you aren't doing the math in your head?
Exactly. When speaking a foreign language, the cognitive load is immense. You are managing vocabulary, pronunciation, social dynamics simultaneously.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And if you also have to manually conjugate a complex verb tense, you will stutter or freeze.
So you're saying this visual mapping basically creates a shortcut?
Yes, an automatic retrieval mechanism.
I don't have to search a mental spreadsheet for the right verb ending. I just flash to the image of the stopped clock and the footprints, and the grammar structure just comes with it.
The image does the heavy lifting for you. It frees up your working memory to focus on the actual content of the conversation.
That makes perfect sense for someone who thinks in pictures. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
What if spatial memory just isn't your strong suit? I mean, a lot of people are highly analytical. They don't want to picture a sun holding a camera. They want logic, order, and predictable systems.
That's a very fair point.
So if visuals don't work, how does Nandia hack that type of brain?
Well, she actually anticipates that exact profile. Nandia recognizes that imagination isn't strictly visual. Imagination can also be structural.
Structural imagination.
Right. For the left brain thinkers, she provides pattern 2, which abandons the cinematic universe entirely and transforms grammar into physics equations.
She literally turns English sentences into algebra. It's so cool. Instead of painting scenes, she defines a set of constants and a set of operators.
Just like a math formula.
Exactly. The constants are the core structural elements of any sentence. S stands for the subject, the person doing the action. O is the object, the receiver.
And then the verbs are handled mathematically too, right?
Yeah. Yes. The base forms of the verbs are categorized. V1 for present, V2 for past, V3 for past participle, and Ving for continuous.
And those constants are basically the raw materials. But the genius of this mathematical approach really lies in how she handles the time operators.
Right, the helper verbs.
Yeah. English has this sprawling, chaotic collection of auxiliary verbs. Words like do, does, is, am, are, has, have, did, was, were.
They are the worst. They are historically a nightmare for learners because they change based on singular, plural, and tense.
Exactly. But rather than listing them all out in a giant chart, she groups them into functional time variables.
Oh, this is my favorite part. She creates an operator called T-pres for present helpers.
Yeah.
She creates T-past for past helpers. And she creates T-fut for future helpers, which is essentially just the word will.
And by doing this, she reduces a massive, messy cluster of vocabulary into clean, single variables. So if you want to construct a sentence in the future simple tense, you don't read a paragraph about how to form it. You look at an equation.
She writes it out simply. Action equals subject multiplied by the future operator multiplied by the base state. On the page, it reads as A equals S times T-foot times V1.
It's so clean.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. She is essentially treating a spoken, highly subjective language like computer code.
Yes, exactly.
You aren't trying to, feel your way through a conversation or rely on intuition. You are running an algorithm. You simply swap out the variables based on what you want to say.
And for an analytical mind, that rigid constraint provides immense psychological safety.
Psychological safety in grammar.
Yes, because languages are inherently messy. They are full of idioms, exceptions, and historical accidents. And that messiness causes anxiety, which is honestly the #1 barrier to fluency.
It totally shifts the dynamic. I mean, if the guardrails are absolute math, you don't have to second guess yourself. You just run the code. S plus T-fed plus V1, I will eat.
The formula guarantees a grammatically flawless output.
It really makes me wonder if having that rigid mathematical structure actually gives a learner more freedom to speak without making mistakes. Does it build confidence?
It absolutely does. When you remove the ambiguity, you remove the hesitation, you stop worrying about sounding foolish and start trusting the underlying math of the sentence.
Okay, so visual scenes bypass rote memorization by using spatial geography. And math equations bypass anxiety by providing algorithmic certainty.
Exactly.
But let's be honest for a second. For a lot of people, math can be just as dry and boring as a spreadsheet.
Oh, for sure.
So if visuals don't work,
Yeah.
and math just puts you to sleep, what is the final option to hardwire this information?
Well, that brings us to pattern 3, and this is the grand finale of Nandia's method. This is where we return to that disclaimer about needing to fantasize.
The do not buy this book part.
Yes, she turns the grammatical rules into a full-blown fantasy role-playing game. It relies heavily on narrative and episodic memory.
It's so fun. She casts the listener directly in the center of the story. The subject of every sentence is an adventurer, and you are the adventurer.
You're the main character.
Right. The verb is your action, and the object of the sentence is the treasure you are trying to reach.
And the true ingenuity here is how she equips the adventurer. Because those auxiliary helper verbs we just organized into math equations, in the RPG pattern, they become physical items.
Tools.
Yes, tools and companions the adventurer carries in their inventory to solve specific grammatical challenges.
And to make those items actually stick in the brain, she relies on sound-alike puns. Now, this is where we have to pause for a second because the specific examples in her text cause me a moment of real confusion.
Oh, the translation issue.
Yeah. She writes that the helper verb will is represented by a wajan, which means a frying pan. And I was just staring at this thinking, how on earth does the English word will sound like a frying pan?
Yes. The linguistic context is crucial here. Nandia designed these specific mnemonic puns for her native cultural context, which is Indonesian.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. In her native language, the phonetics of wajan serve as a sticky, slightly humorous mental trigger for the English will.
It's a pun.
Exactly. The broader lesson for you, the listener, isn't to force an Indonesian pun into an English-speaking brain. The goal is to recognize the mechanism. You have to invent your own native language puns to equip your adventurer.
Got it.
Yeah.
So if I'm an English speaker building my own inventory, I might say the helper verb will sounds like a wheel.
Oh, that's good.
So my adventurer uses a magical wheel to roll forward into future actions. And for has or have, maybe a picture a hazard sign. Or like a half-eaten apple.
Exactly. The more personalized and slightly absurd you make that phonetic connection, the stronger the memory trace will be.
So cool.
In Nandia's original text, she uses a bulldozer, a dozer, for the verbs do and doze, which actually works perfectly in English too.
It really does. Dozer for do.
Yeah. And she turns the past continuous helpers was and were into a magical robe of awareness you wore in the past.
I love the idea of I do my homework, turning into my adventurer driving a giant bulldozer through a pile of assignments.
It's a great visual.
Let's put this RPG into action with a complex scenario. Let's look at the past continuous tense. This describes an action you were doing in the past when something else interrupted you.
Right. So, in the logic of the role-playing game, your adventurer is wearing the past robe of awareness and is deeply engaged in an action, let's say, eating a meal.
So I picture myself wearing this massive glowing robe, happily eating a feast, and suddenly a dragon crashes through the ceiling.
Perfect.
I was eating when the dragon arrived. The grammar rule isn't a formula anymore. It's a specific traumatic event that happened to my character.
Okay, let's escalate it. Let's do the present perfect continuous.
Good boy.
This is an action that began in the past, has been happening for a specific duration, and is still ongoing. It requires the subject, plus have been, plus the verbing form.
Okay, so to build that scene using the inventory, my adventurer meets a ghost companion, which Nandi uses for the shave helpers, and this ghost is aggressively waving a giant flag.
Right, the flag represents the bin helper, indicating a long duration.
Exactly. So the mental image is me standing next to a ghost waving a flag to signal that I have been eating this feast for 3 hours straight and I am still going.
It's completely absurd, but this raises an important question. Why does a brain remember a ghost waving a flag better than it remembers the phrase subject plus have been plus verbing?
Yeah, why is that?
The cognitive science points directly to episodic memory and something called the bizarreness effect.
The bizarreness effect. I haven't heard of that.
Yes, it's this psychological phenomenon where absurd, unusual, or highly incongruous information is remembered much more easily than common logical information. By giving an abstract, completely dry grammar rule, a bizarre personality, and placing it within a narrative, your brain categorizes it as an experience. And we are fundamentally wired to remember stories and experiences. We are not wired to remember disconnected data.
Because a story has emotional stakes, even if they are ridiculous. Like a dragon attacking your dinner has a narrative arc. A timeline with an X on it just does not.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you listening? I mean, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground here today.
Oh.
We went from visualizing literal suns and rockets to map out space, to utilizing complex algebraic formulas to guarantee accuracy, to equipping an adventurer with a magical wheel and a bulldozer just to conquer the timeline.
It's a lot of different strategies.
It is. But the overarching takeaway from Nandia's work is that the goal of learning isn't to force your brain to conform to the textbook. The goal is to aggressively adapt the textbook to fit the unique shape of your specific brain.
Well said. If you are a visual thinker, you draw the treasure map. If you are deeply analytical, you rely on the algebraic equations. And if you are a storyteller, you cast yourself as the hero in an absurd grammatical epic.
You have full permission to make the learning process as weird and personal as you need it to be.
But, and this is a massive caveat that we really cannot skip over, all the imagination and bizarre imagery in the world won't make you fluent without one incredibly grounded ingredient.
Right. And Nandia, despite all her fantastical methods, makes sure to hammer this point home at the very end of her text.
Yes, she does. The final section of her guide pulls all of this high-flying imagination back down to earth. She transitions from theory straight into rigorous, standard, fill-in-the-blank practice questions.
She provides practical exercises. Things like, my sister always blank in the shower. The listener has to recognize it's a simple present habit, picture the foundational brick, and plug in sings.
Or, we blanked to the beach last summer. The listener sees the stopped antique clock of the past, simple tense, and plugs in went.
She emphasizes that clever tricks, spatial maps, and imaginative role-playing are essentially just the keys that unlock the door.
Right. They get you past that initial wall of confusion and anxiety, but they only solidify into true language acquisition if they are paired with consistent, repetitive practice. Consistency is the engine that drives actual fluency.
The weird tricks just help you understand the rule and recall it quickly in the moment, but the repetitive practice is what eventually makes it automatic.
Do it enough times and you won't even have to conjure the image of the ghost or the rocket anymore.
The correct grammar will just flow naturally. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been incredibly fun tearing up the traditional spreadsheet and letting our imaginations dictate the rules for a bit.
It really has been.
Hopefully it changes how you look at the next overwhelming wall of information you're forced to learn.
We just spent this entire deep dive exploring how a student invented ghosts, algebraic equations, and stopped clocks just to survive a language class. It makes you
Yeah.
wonder, what other boring rules or obligations in your daily life, whether it's managing your complicated work processes, organizing your personal finances, or just getting through your morning routine, could be instantly mastered if you stopped trying to memorize them via brute force and started turning them into your own bizarre personal mythology?